ready to begin construction. The design is finalized.
Easy, bring it down. That's good. Hold it there. Let's secure this side.
Hello, everyone. Tonight, we're stepping into the construction of the World Trade Center. Between 1966 and 1971, New York built 2 towers that would change the skyline forever. If you enjoyed this journey, like the video, subscribe to Step into History, and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next journey into the past.
2 towers, 110 stories each, 1,368 feet and 1,362 feet tall. The tallest buildings on Earth when they were finished. Built on a structural system no engineer had ever tried at that scale. Anchored to bedrock 70 feet below a piece of Manhattan that wasn't even real land. It was landfill. And the Hudson River was right there, pressing against the site, waiting to flood everything the moment somebody dug too deep.
Secure.
They pulled it off anyway. 7 years, 200,000 tons of steel, and a wall built using an Italian technique that had never been attempted at anything close to this size in America. This is the story of how the Twin Towers were built.
And I used AI to bring their construction process to life. So, let's get into it.
The idea for
Gentlemen,
a World Trade
this
Center
project will
had been
define the
floating
future of the
around
city.
since 1946,
If we build this right,
but nothing
people will
happened for
remember it
years.
generations.
Downtown Manhattan was losing ground to Midtown, and David Rockefeller, who ran Chase Manhattan Bank, decided something drastic was needed.
Gentlemen,
In 1958,
this project will
he founded the
transform
Downtown Lower
for decades
Manhattan
to come.
Association and pushed for a massive trade complex. The
Gentlemen,
Port Authority
each
of
floor
New
has been
York and New
designed to
Jersey
maximize strength,
took on the
efficiency,
project
and
after a
usable
deal
space.
that included taking
When
over the
completed, these
bankrupt
towers will become one of
Hudson
the most
and
recognizable
Manhattan
landmarks in the
Railroad.
world.
The site chosen was Radio Row, a dense neighborhood of over 400 electronics merchants. When they learned the whole area would be demolished, shopkeeper Oscar Nadell led a committee that staged a mock funeral through the streets, carrying a black coffin with a sign, "Here lies Mr. Small Businessman." Lawsuits went to the Supreme Court. The court declined to intervene. On March 21, 1966, wrecking crews began tearing buildings down. The Port Authority had selected architect Minoru Yamasaki in 1962. They wanted 10 million square feet of office space. The only way to fit that much without making every floor dark and bloated was to go vertical, 110 stories each. Yamasaki, who was afraid of heights, designed the windows just 18 inches wide, so occupants would always feel a wall within reach. The structural engineering fell to Worthington, Skilling, Helly, and Jackson, with Leslie Robertson leading the effort. They developed a tube frame system that had never been used on a building this tall. Instead of packing the interior with heavy load-bearing columns, they concentrated support in 2 places. A dense grid of exterior columns spaced just over 3 feet apart around the perimeter, and a rectangular core at the center of each floor holding elevators and stairwells. Between those 2 structures, every floor was open, column-free space. It was lighter than traditional construction, which meant the towers would move more in high winds. Robertson ran extensive wind tunnel tests to keep the sway within limits that wouldn't make people in the upper floors nauseous. The elevator problem was just as difficult. A conventional shaft layout for a building that tall would have eaten most of the usable floor area. The solution was sky lobbies on the 44th and 78th floors. Express elevators carried passengers to the sky lobby, where they transferred to local elevators serving each zone. That system cut roughly 70% of the shaft space a conventional layout would have needed. Construction started with a problem that had nothing to do with height. The entire site sat on landfill. Manhattan's natural shoreline ran roughly along Greenwich Street, several hundred feet east of where the towers would stand. Everything west of that line had been dumped into the Hudson over centuries. Ship ballast, demolition rubble, dredged river muck. Below all of it, bedrock sat 70 feet down, and the Hudson River was pushing against the western edge of the site, ready to pour in the moment anyone dug a hole.
We've
The site
successfully
was threaded
relocated
with
the utility
old
lines.
water
The
mains,
foundation work can
cables,
continue.
and pipes
Once this
that all
section is
had to be
secured,
relocated
excavation
before
above can move ahead
excavation could
safely.
begin. You cannot build the tallest structures in the world on loose fill with a river pressing against the foundation. The answer was the slurry wall, a technique developed in Italy in the 1950s for the Milan subway. Nobody
Gentlemen,
had tried it at anything
the slurry
close
wall
to this
will protect
size in the
entire
United
foundation
States.
during excavation.
In 1964, the Port Authority sent engineer George Tamaro to Italy to study the method. By 1967, Tamaro was running the operation himself.
Here is how it worked. Crews dug a trench 3 feet wide, 22 feet long, and 70 feet deep along the site's perimeter.
Keep
As
the
they
slurry
dug,
moving.
they continuously
Don't let the
pumped
trench
in
collapse.
bentonite slurry,
This wall will
a
hold back
dense
the Hudson
liquid
River.
clay
If
that
this
was heavier
succeeds,
than the surrounding
the entire
soil and
foundation can be built
groundwater.
safely.
The weight of the slurry held the trench walls in place and kept the river from flooding in. If the pumps fell behind, even briefly, water pressure from the Hudson could have collapsed the trench and flooded the excavation. The crews ran the slurry operation around the clock. Once a section reached bedrock, workers lowered in a steel reinforcing cage that could weigh up to 22 tons. Positioning these cages into a 70-foot deep slot, only 3 feet wide, required precision that left almost no room for error.
Copy that.
Then concrete was pumped in from the bottom of the trench, pushing the slurry up and out as it filled the space. When the concrete hardened, it formed a permanent watertight wall bonded to the bedrock. They repeated this 158 times, panel by panel, section by section, until the deep basement area of the site was sealed inside what the engineers called the bathtub. The 3-foot-thick wall ran nearly 3,400 linear feet and went 70 feet straight down into the earth, enclosing 11 of the site's 16 acres. With the bathtub sealed, crews started excavating everything inside it. They pulled out 1.2 million cubic yards of earth, old fill, and centuries of accumulated debris. As they dug deeper, they installed high-strength steel tie-back anchors through the slurry wall and drove them up to 35 feet into the bedrock on the other side to brace the wall against the enormous lateral pressure of the surrounding ground and river water. 1,500 of these anchors were installed at intervals as the excavation went down, each one capable of handling loads between 100 and 300 tons. Rather than trucking all that material to a landfill, the Port Authority barged it to the Hudson River shoreline and used it to extend Manhattan 700 feet westward. That new land eventually became Battery Park City, an entire neighborhood built on the dirt pulled from the World Trade Center hole. Steel erection on the North Tower began in August 1968. The South Tower followed in January 1969. Both towers would consume more than 200,000 tons of structural steel, sourced from at least 7 foundries spread across the country. That was more steel than went into the Verrazano Narrows Bridge. The components were prefabricated off-site to keep the schedule tight and the quality consistent. Perimeter wall sections arrived as 3-story tall panels, with the columns and spandrel plates already welded together at the factory. Each panel weighed up to 22 tons and had to be hoisted, positioned, and bolted into place while hanging from a crane hundreds of feet in the air. Floor trusses came pre-assembled, designed to span the 60 feet between the perimeter wall and the core without any intermediate columns. Steel arrived by rail to Jersey City, then by truck or barge to the site, which had almost no room to stockpile material. Pieces had to arrive and get set on nearly the same day. Getting those pieces to the top of a building that would eventually stand 110 stories tall required a crane that did not exist in the American market.
Carl
These core
Koch
connections are
Erecting
critical.
Company,
Agreed.
the steel
Tolerances are
contractor,
tight.
brought in
Everything is ready.
hydraulic cranes designed
lift
by
the next
Favel
section.
Mort in New South Wales, Australia.
Bring it up slowly.
The workers called them kangaroo cranes. They could lift heavier loads than a conventional derrick, and they had a trick no standard crane could match. They could
Climb
raise
is good.
themselves
Hold
up
steady.
the building's
Got it. Sparks
core
are flying.
as the structure grew, jumping several floors at a time using their own hydraulic power. Each tower had 4 kangaroo cranes, one positioned at each corner of the elevator core, working simultaneously at different heights. 8 cranes in total across both towers. When conditions were good, crews set the steel for 3 floors every 2 weeks. Conditions were frequently not good.
Valves frozen.
The Australian
Pressure
cranes
steady.
had radiators
Got it.
designed for
Stable.
mild climates, and the hydraulic
Check the
oil
joints. All
froze
clear.
in New
We're good.
York
We're good.
winters. The
We're
pumps
on
turned out to
schedule.
be untested
The next steel
prototypes
sessions go up this
that the
week.
manufacturer
Everything
had
is ready for
swapped in at the
installation.
last minute to hit the required lifting speeds. Automatic
section will be
welding
installed
machines that were
next week.
supposed to accelerate
Welds are
the
ready for
ironwork
inspection.
never ran reliably and had to be abandoned entirely in favor of manual welders. Koch Erecting realized within months that it had massively underbid the contract and nearly
The
went
steel delivery is
bankrupt
on
before
schedule.
the steel was
We
even
begin the next
halfway
phase
up.
next week. The tower core
In
is progressing exactly
1970,
as planned.
a tugboat
This will
strike
become
shut
the
the
tallest
harbor.
complex in the world.
The Port Authority tried helicopters to move steel, but
Look
one
out, the
lost
beam's
its
slipping.
load into
It's
the
falling.
waterway,
Clear the area.
and the
Get back,
idea
watch
was
the waves.
abandoned. Crews could only set whatever pieces were already staged on site. Despite all of that, the iron workers kept climbing. These were men who walked steel beams at 1,000 feet with a hard hat as their only protection. Falls were the most common cause of death on the project. There were no safety nets for much of the construction. The wind at those heights was constant and brutal, strong enough to knock a man sideways if he wasn't braced for it. The North Tower topped out on December 23, 1970. The South Tower reached its full height on July 19, 1971. For the first time in nearly 40 years, the Empire State Building was no longer the tallest thing on the New York skyline. The view from Midtown had permanently changed. The first tenants moved into the lower floors of the North Tower in December 1970, while ironworkers were still setting steel on the upper floors. The South Tower accepted its first tenants in January 1972. Construction and occupancy overlapped for years. People rode elevators to their offices in the morning while welders sparked above them, and concrete trucks poured on floors a few stories up. The numbers on the fit-out were staggering. Each tower had 99 elevators, including express cars that traveled at 1,600 feet per minute, the fastest in the world at that time. The buildings contained 425,000 cubic yards of concrete, 3,000 miles of electrical wiring, 40,000 doors, and 43,600 windows. 6 acres of marble were installed across the lobbies. The mechanical systems alone could fill their own documentary.
Pressure
A
looks
central
good.
chilling
Bring pump
plant
2
below the
online.
complex
Pump 2 running
produced
now.
enough
Flow
cooling
rate is
for
holding steady. Good. Let's
15,000
keep it there.
homes. Diesel generators stored enough fuel for 48 hours of backup power. Below street level, the complex housed a shopping mall, a 2,000-car parking garage, a station for the PATH commuter rail connecting to New Jersey, an armory for the Secret Service, and a police precinct. The South Tower's rooftop observation deck sat 1,362 feet above the street, and an
Look
indoor
at that
deck
view.
opened on the
It's
107th
incredible.
floor of the
See
same building.
entire city.
The
Hold it
exterior
steady right
cladding
there.
went on in
specs match the
parallel
skyline
with the
view.
interior
Good. Let's
fit-out.
confirm the final layout.
The aluminum alloy panels that covered the perimeter columns gave the towers their distinctive vertical ribbing. Each
Alignment
panel
looks good
had to
from
be
this side.
hoisted,
Keep
fitted,
it steady.
and
We're
sealed
almost
against
finished.
wind
Let's
and
lock this
rain
panel into place.
at heights where the
Steady
wind was
forward.
never predictable.
Got it. Alignment looks
Workers
good.
installing windows and cladding on the upper floors dealt with gusts that could rip unsecured material right off the building. The towers were not loved when they opened. Ada Louise Huxtable of the New York Times called the design pure technology with lobbies of pure schmaltz. Others dismissed them as oversized filing cabinets. They also sat largely empty. The Port Authority had to fill them with its own offices and state agencies just to avoid the embarrassment of obviously vacant floors. The formal dedication happened on April 4, 1973. Both governors attended. President Nixon sent a statement. The ceremony was brief and polite. Behind it was a project that had cost well over $1 billion against an original budget of $400 million. Taken 7 years, employed more than 10,000 workers at various stages, with 3,500 on site at peak, and killed 60 people through falls, equipment failures, and blasts. The towers filled up over the following decades. By the 1990s, the complex housed over 430 companies from 28 countries, and 50,000 people went to work there every day. The engineering legacy went further than the buildings themselves. The tube frame structure became a standard approach for super-tall construction worldwide. The slurry wall technique was adopted for deep urban excavations across the country. The sky lobby concept showed up in towers from Chicago to Kuala Lumpur. The buildings stood for 28 years. They are not there anymore. 7 years of construction, 60 lives, a neighborhood erased, a skyline remade, and a piece of land pulled straight out of the Hudson River that is still there today. But the foundations held. The slurry wall, the bathtub that George Tamaro built starting in 1967, survived. It is still holding back the river 70 feet below the memorial that stands where the towers used to be.
Thank you for watching Step into History. For a brief moment, you stepped into a world that once existed. Towers that reshaped a skyline, and a project that changed engineering forever. These stories are more than the past. They are echoes of how we dreamed, built, and transformed the world around us. From the slurry wall deep beneath Manhattan to the final steel beams reaching into the sky, the story of the World Trade Center remains one of the most ambitious construction projects in history. If you want to continue exploring the cities, structures, and civilizations that shaped our world, subscribe and join the journey. Where should we travel next?